Welcome everyone to the March webinar. We are going to be giving a presentation today that was actually delivered at the Wireless LAN Professionals Conference, WLPC, in an evening session, and so it was not recorded. And several people that attended asked if there would be a recording available. And so we decided to offer the same basic presentation that we delivered there in a webinar so that we would have a recording of this and others could view it, even those not at WLPC. And so we're going to be talking about the future of wireless. What do the projections say? We have scoured the projections from the various different organizations that do these types of industry analysis and looking at sales volume as it has proceeded in recent years and how it's expected to proceed into the coming years. And so we have projections going through the middle of the next decade that we're going to be talking about. And the way we're going to look at it is we will look at different individual wireless protocols, and we'll also look at a couple of general industries that deploy wireless and see what the projections are for those. And that will give us an idea then of where we should be focusing our knowledge growth in the coming decade so that we're prepared to work in the world of the future. We're going to also be talking about a couple of other things that are really important. And so let's look at our list, our agenda. Where's wireless going? We'll talk about these protocols and expectations. What skills will be important? So we'll talk about not only the projected protocols that are coming, but all right, given that, what do we need to know in relation to those protocols and to the wireless industry at large in order to be successful in the coming years? And then we'll talk a little bit about how we'll get there. So we're going to jump right in, and as we talk about each protocol or industry, we'll see a similar slide to this where we have the protocol and then the expected growth rate, the current USD market, and the projection for that market. The first one then is wireless HART. Now, wireless HART is an 802.15.4 based protocol. It works in 2.4 gigahertz. And this particular protocol is used in oil and gas. It's used in some other areas of industry as well, but these are some very common areas where we see it deployed. And it's used for predictive maintenance. And one of the drivers is the security features that it offers and the robustness that it offers. Both wireless HART and ISA 111A are engineered on top of 802.15.4 to actually implement some scheduling algorithms that provide for better priority for important communications and things like that, that are not necessarily inherent in something like Wi-Fi. So the expected growth rate is significant here, 12.5% CAGR. And CAGR is the compound annual growth rate. So what that means is, and the way it would be calculated, for example, is if you want to say, well, what do we predict the market will be in 2035? And what is the market today? So to go from where it is today to where we predict it will be in 2035, what percentage must it grow by each year? That's how they calculate CAGR if you've not studied that before. And so basically what we're looking at is about 3 times the size of the current market in the next decade. So it currently sits at about $500 million. It's expected to grow to $1.7 billion in this coming decade. Now, again, this is going to all be based on projections made by other organizations, not by CWNP. So we're pulling this from research that you normally have to pay a lot of money to access and things like that. But this research is done so that businesses can decide where to invest. And this is what we see with wireless HART. The next protocol, and by the way, we're going to be going through these in somewhat of an order of significance of size that they're expected to have in the market in about 10 years. And you'll see it gets bigger and bigger. Zigbee, the next decade, a pretty modest CAGR of 8.17%. It's currently at about $4 billion, and it's expected to roughly double that by 2035. There is obviously only real growth going forward of any significance in Zigbee 3 and later. Smart homes are driving some of this because some smart home are being built with Zigbee integrated during the build out. And of course, other smart sensors. One of the benefits they provide is energy efficiency. And that motivates some of these deployments that want long battery life. But the difference between, say, Zigbee and something like LoRa or LoRaWAN is that Zigbee can push more data through every day. Now, that does mean, obviously, that the lifespan of a battery-operated device will not be as great for Zigbee as it would for something like LoRaWAN or Sigfox, for that matter. The Zigbee protocol is also an 802.15.4 based protocol. And the organization, the Connectivity Alliance, that manages this, previously known as the Zigbee Alliance, really has their focus on some of their other technologies, and Zigbee is just an underlaying possible layer 1 and layer 2 solution that you might use. And so their focus is on more of abstracting that lower layer and making usable data available through different systems and applications for smart homes and smart buildings. And so time will tell if Zigbee continues to grow as expected or if it slows down as other protocols gain more market share. And we're seeing significant growth in other protocols that we're not seeing with Zigbee. So that's going to be interesting to watch in the coming years. Bluetooth is next. This is expected to grow at a significant 14.15% CAGR. It currently sits at about $4.5 billion, is expected to grow by over 3 times to $17 billion by 2035. Now, a big part of Bluetooth, though, will continue to be the peripheral devices, headsets, mice and keyboards, these typical things that we know of that we've used Bluetooth for forever, right? But Bluetooth is also making inroads into Internet of Things technologies and beyond just beaconing. And this is because the newer physical layers, starting with Bluetooth 5, give you the ability to communicate at well over 100 meters. They give you the ability to transmit a significant amount of data as well. And so there are benefits to using Bluetooth in an IoT type deployment. Like Zigbee, like Wireless Heart, it operates in that 2.4 gigahertz frequency band, of course. The big thing that's going to continue to drive Bluetooth growth, though, is just that it's in everything, right? You can't hardly find a laptop that you can buy without Bluetooth being in there. But again, that Bluetooth is primarily aimed at peripheral connectivity and not necessarily at IoT type solutions. So time will tell how the market takes these PHY enhancements and utilizes them for IoT beyond just a few lighting solutions and things like that we're starting to see now. The next protocol is Z-Wave, of course, primarily seen in the consumer market, but it's expected to grow significantly with a 13.25% CAGR. Currently sits at about $12.5 billion and is expected to grow to 43.8, almost $44 billion. So again, a factor of about 3 times growth in that decade. And Z-Wave, of course, driven by this home market. We're seeing it in small businesses and some small manufacturing environments and things like that, where they're simply buying hardware that wasn't necessarily engineered with robust enclosures for business or even robust hardware for business, but using it just the same because of its pricing and ease of deployment. So we'll see how this continues to grow in the coming year because, again, there are alternatives coming on the scene. So we're actually at a state right now where these projections, personally, I would say that they're, maybe 50 to 60% stable at best. And that is because of the fact that there are so many protocols vying for typical device connectivity for IoT. And when you see that in a space, sometimes things surprise you as to what wins and what loses. And it's not always the best technology that wins. We've seen that so many times in the history of information and operations technology. So we can't just say, well, I know this technology really well. It's the best technology, so it's going to win. But that's just not the way things work in the tech sector. And so we'll have to see what plays out in the coming year. But if we spread the growth that's expected of these different protocols across these protocols, understanding that one of them may grow significantly more than others as far as the projections, and others may grow significantly less as far as the projections, I don't have doubt that we'll see the growth that is expected overall in the wireless space. Wi-Fi, of course, is expected to continue to grow, a good, stable, but more than just surviving growth rate. And what I mean by that is we saw with Zigbee what looks like a surviving growth rate. In other words, Zigbee has hope that we'll still even be talking about it in the middle of the next decade. Wi-Fi's growth is beyond that, and so is Bluetooth's and other technologies that we're talking about. So when a growth rate in a projection is above 10 to 12%, you can usually trust that it's still going to be a formidable player at the end of that projection period. When it's less than 10%, you just don't know. It may be, like a Commodore 64. From 1985 to 1995, the world changed for Commodore 64. And from 2025 to 2035, we may see some things change for Zigbee. But Wi-Fi is still going to be here. It has that benefit of ubiquitousness that Bluetooth has, that it's in all of your laptops. And so we need the networks for those laptops to connect to. Since we have to build the networks for that anyway, then it can make sense in a lot of deployments to use it as an IoT solution as well. And so we'll see Wi-Fi to continue to be used in those ways. It currently sits at about a $22 billion USD market with projection to $93 billion. But now what we're going to see is there's something that's expected to grow even bigger than this. And I think these projections might shock you. And actually, I got these projections from multiple sources because they were so high, I simply could not go with just one source. And instead, I picked the lowest of 3 different organizations' projections. And these are the projections for private 5G. And of course, they're including 5G, 6G, whatever the G is by 2035. The expected growth rate is 45%. Over the next decade. That is significant. It's currently a $2.6 billion market. This is not the cellular market, okay? This is the private 5G market. So this is the difference between, your cell towers that are all over the place and using the cellular protocol technology of 5G and eventually 6G and so forth in private networks. It's expected to grow to $109 billion by 2035. We're seeing a lot of things that are causing this movement, and one of the key things that has come out in the last 6 or 7 years with significant popularity is the concept of the eSIM. So instead of having to have a physical SIM, using a software-based SIM allows for easier deployment of private 5G. And I think this is an important thing that we're going to see growth in. I saw a comment in the comments of the 5G cert that's free at CWMP, and that is a Solana certification that they offer through us. We provide that for them. We are looking at the possibility of private 5G as a certification in our new self-hosted certification line. We currently have the certified Python network administrator and engineer, the CPNAE. We're going to be doing a networking essentials. We're going to be doing a security essentials and a TCP/IP master and a few others. And private 5G might be in that as well. Just to let you know, by the way, about that series of certifications, there's a twofold motivation there. One, it's to provide them and the value to the community at large. And two, it is to service the higher education market that has significant needs for better educational materials for their students that are getting 2- and 4-year computer science degrees. And the colleges have been reaching out to us and saying, we're tired of teaching people 7 to 10-year-old technology, and we want to be able to deliver something that when they walk out of the university, they're ready to hit the ground running because they've learned newer technologies. And so that's really the motivation of some of those. So we'll see. I don't want to overpromise. So private 5G is not currently on the schedule. It is simply on the list as something that we may develop as our own certification instead of just the one that is currently free from Solona. That doesn't mean we'd stop offering the one from Solona. That's vendor specific. That's theirs. We're happy to do that for any vendor that might be on the webinar or see this video at a later time. If you want to create a certification and have us host it for you, then we're happy to help out with that. But it would not be a CWNP certification. It would just be hosted by us. Okay, the next one, another one, and this was one in my research that when I saw it, I said, wow. And then I started looking at what's going on, and I said, you know, it makes sense. LoRaWAN, expected growth rate of 41%, growing barely higher than 5G, private 5G, to 110 billion by 2035. Now, to me, this one is less likely than the 5G one, if I'm just being completely open as we talk about these projections. I think the 5G one has a ton of momentum behind it that is not as obviously behind LoRaWAN. But I will tell you that its use in smart cities does have the potential to make it a reality. LoRaWAN is a great protocol for things like traffic, device management, things of that sort that you see that only need to communicate a few times a day or receive configurations once or twice a week, things like that. The potential for that, agriculture, there are so many areas where LoRaWAN can play a significant role. It's just, are we going to see that massive explosion of agro IoT and the full-scale smart city IoT stuff in these next 5 years? Or will it really start in the 5 years after that, say 2030 to 2035, which would kind of delay these projections a little bit? So it's going to be interesting, but I do see the growth being significant for LoRaWAN, even if it doesn't reach this level. Now, let's look at a couple of industry-specific things, not looking at specific protocols. Excuse me. So first of all, industrial wireless IoT. Now notice this is not industrial IoT. Industrial IoT is significantly larger than this because wireless is actually the smaller portion of industrial IoT. Most of it is wired. So the wireless IoT is currently at 65 million installed units. This isn't dollar value here. I couldn't find any research that gave a dollar value for this. So this is number of units installed. Currently at 65 million, with it expected to grow by a factor of 10 to about 686 million. That's 26.5% CAGR in the coming decade. Now, I will tell you that, because this won't really come up again, but for both this one and the next one, you're going to need to understand industrial technology if you want to work in this space. So it won't be enough to just know the wireless. I mean, if you're going to work in it in a significant level, you're going to need to understand SCADA systems and PLCs and controllers and HMI and all the rest of the stuff that's utilized. So you will have to go further into industrial technology to really become a specialist in that space. But it is an area for significant growth. So you'll definitely want to be watching that space. The next one is, of course, wireless sensor network markets. And it's also heavily used in industrial, but it's also used in smart cities and in even home automation for that matter. Expected growth rate is about the same, 26%. Its current market is 14.8 billion. It's expected to grow to 156 billion by 2035. Now, this is the big explosion of IoT that's driving the LoRaWAN expectations, the industrial IoT expectations, the WSN expectations. All of these are coming from the parallel expectations of the explosion of IoT. And so, all of this is not for a wireless radio, right? So we're talking about the device that has the wireless radio in it, etc. All of that, the software ecosystem that's going to support it, all of these things coming together to shape the sizes of these markets. And so we're definitely seeing there's an expectation of significant growth. Now, here's the big point I want to drive home with this. Well, first of all, let me say this. We heard last year, throughout the year, several times in each quarter about here's how many layoffs happened in this part of the IT sector. Here's how many layoffs happened in that part of the IT sector. They did happen. But what you don't generally see when those things are reported is you don't see how many hirings have taken place. And interestingly, the number of hirings significantly outpaced the number of layoffs. In other words, there were more total jobs in IT at the end of last year than there were at the beginning of last year. The IT job market grew last year. It's expected to grow this year as well. Obviously, anything can happen with economies and what have you, but the expectation is continued growth. And yes, this is even with knowing that, hey, AI is there, and will we have jobs after AI? The expectation is that at least this year you will. So the point is that there's expectation of growth in these industries. And therefore, if it is a passion of yours, if you love working with wireless, then hey, it's a good place to continue growing your career. So what are the future skills? Well, according to many of these same research projections, they also reported on the skills that are going to be needed to work with these technologies. Of course, the top one is network design and RF engineering. And the second one was troubleshooting and then analysis. The second one was security and then analysis and troubleshooting or problem solving. So these are the top technical skills that came up the most in these different research projections. The non-technical skill that obviously is the biggest is communications. So communications and collaboration are key. It's obviously not just about having the technical know-how, but being able to communicate that know-how as well as gather requirements and the resources needed to make things happen. So these are the skill sets that you'll want to focus on building in the coming years. And how do you know which ones to build? Well, the answer is simply if you were to look at deploying a LoRaWAN network, what do you not know? Okay, fill the gaps. What do you not know to be able to deploy a LoRaWAN network? Figure that out and then fill those gaps. What do you not know to deploy a Wi-Fi network? Figure it out and fill those gaps. What about designing one? Figure it out and fill those gaps. So you know yourself what you know and what you do not know. So a good thing that you can look at, whether you're planning to get our various certifications or not, look at the objectives for our certifications, because experts came together to build those. I didn't just write those objectives myself and say, here they are, world. We get a team of subject matter experts together. They argue, debate, differ, agree, and come to consensus over a period of hours and days to define those documents. So take those documents and use them to determine what you need to be studying to fill the gaps. Because those documents, those objectives for example, CWDP for a designer, or CWSP for a security professional, or CWICP for IoT protocols, including wireless HART and LoRaWAN and so on. So look at those objectives and ask, what do I not know that's in these objectives? And then you can begin learning from there. Now, one of the key things that I want to point out as we finish up the rest of today's presentation is I want to focus a little bit more on helping you understand where you need to go and how to get there for the future of careers in wireless specifically, but also in technology in general. So the first thing to know is what kind of person will be most valuable in the future. And the answer is bald people. Bald people will be most valuable. No, I'm kidding. The future person that will be most valuable, what do they look like? Well, let's talk about the past. So if you go back 30 or 40 years ago, the past was what we would call an I person. Now, not the pronoun I, the letter I symbolizing this. And notice the letter I is one vertical bar, right? Because we don't use the fancier I that has a bar at the top and the bottom. So this person knows one topic extremely well. They're an expert in that one topic, and they really are at best a novice in any other area. At present, the people that find the most success are what we call a T person. That is, they have deep expertise in an area of specialization, but they have moderate professional level knowledge in a lot of other areas as well. Think about it like a networking professional who also knows a moderate level of scripting for programming automation, who also knows a bit about database technologies and how to implement database systems and utilize them, who may also understand how they can use open source to build a dashboard to report on the status of their network devices and systems. You get the picture. So they have more than a novice level of knowledge in many other areas of their profession, even though they have an expert level knowledge in their given area of specialization. That's that present person. But the future person, they're going to be a pi individual. And we use pi as the symbol because now we have multiple, and it could be more than two, but multiple areas of deep expertise and many areas of specialization. And the people that the researchers are saying are going to be best in this future are not people who have, say, a deep expertise in wireless and a deep expertise in programming, or a deep expertise in wireless and a deep expertise in security, but rather they're going to be a person with a deep expertise in, say, wireless and a deep expertise in project management or communication skills, delivering presentations, for example, and things like that. The point is, their other area of deep expertise is not necessarily technical, but they have to be this pi person. You know, we used to call them a Renaissance person, right? You know, they knew everything about everything. Well, we're not expected to know everything about everything, but we're expected to know an awful lot about several things and a moderate amount about many things, because that's the world we're moving into with all the information that's out there, right? So this started with the 1960s and 70s, the information explosion, it was called. Interestingly, I just watched a video last night from 1971, I believe it was, titled The Information Explosion. It was put out by McGraw-Hill Videos in their educational series of videos they did back in the day, mostly used in high schools and so on. And they were talking about how the information explosion is upon us. So they had no idea what was going to be upon us with the eventuality of the internet and so many other things. And now we're in the new information explosion, which is the ability to process and analyze massive amounts of information very rapidly, like we can with modern artificial intelligence. Yes, Daniel, that's exactly what I'm talking about. The old 16 millimeter reels. The great thing is, if any of you care, at archive.org, tremendous amounts of these vintage videos from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. These old educational videos are up there, and it's really interesting to watch them. There was one on developing self-reliance that I thought, man, I wish every person under the age of 12, 13 years old in our world could see this video, because it's the kind of thing that's not necessarily taught as much today. I will check it out, Daniel. I will check out the lottery. All right. So the question then is, how are we going to manage our careers as we go through this forthcoming period that's coming upon us? Well, first of all, you have two ways to look at the future: teleologically or aleologically. What does that mean? Well, teleological analysis is determining your intent and purpose and then making your decisions according to that. Comes from Greek. Aleological, coming from Latin, is saying, what happens, happens. So one is proactive, the other is reactive. One is planned happenstance. The other is pure happenstance. Happenstance is a fancy word from the research literature on the coincidences that just happen to us in life. The opportunities that come our way or the problems that come our way, which can be seen as something to solve and then find advantage or something to simply endure. The point is, planned happenstance says, I'm going to have a plan, and I'm also going to acknowledge that, you know what, things do not always work exactly as planned. So what do I do if things don't work as planned? Control versus controlled. In other words, are circumstances controlling your decisions, or are you controlling the decisions in the circumstances? Directed versus driven. You're choosing the direction versus being pushed in the direction, right? So it's just two different perspectives. Yes, all of us have to react to happenstances that are out of our control. But how we react to those happenstances determines if it's pure happenstance or planned happenstance. In other words, something happens and whatever it causes, I just accept, or do I look at it as a problem and ask, what is my alternate plan of action going forward? And of course, this comes down to setting goals to accomplish this. And when it comes to setting your goals to prepare for this next decade, there are different ways to look at goals. We have performance goals and mastery goals. I'm going to start at the bottom. The ideal goals are mastery goals. And the reason they're considered ideal is because you're not competing with anything but yourself. In other words, mastery goals are set, I want to accomplish X, which I have not accomplished before. So I'm not looking at anybody else. I'm not saying, so-and-so has 57 certifications, and so I want to get 58. No, it doesn't matter what someone else has done. I'm setting my own goals because I desire to achieve them. Those are mastery goals. Now, performance goals can be good if they're performance achievement goals, though research shows that they're not as effective at motivating us as mastery goals. A performance goal is a goal that is set based on some external driving force where you need to meet that objective. But a performance achievement goal is I want to achieve it to accomplish the outcome. And a performance avoidance goal is I want to achieve it in order to avoid a pain that will occur if I don't. Interestingly enough, we always hear you're motivated by pain and pleasure. The reality is that research has shown that when it comes to goals, when we set goals based on a future pleasure, then we're more likely to achieve them than if we set them based on avoiding future pain. But ideally, we're just achieving it because we want to achieve it. We want to feel accomplished. We want to get this thing done. That goal is more motivating than either of the other two. In most situations, of course, all of this can be a bit contextual, but generally speaking, what I've said here is true related to the goal-setting literature. Now, one of the things to think about when we're setting these goals and we're deciding if we're going to be teleological or aleological in our career paths is looking at ourselves. And here's an important thing that we have to keep in mind. We all perceive our current self as something. We would describe ourselves in a particular way. If we were asked to describe our emotions, we would describe them in a certain way. Our physical abilities, we would describe them in a certain way. Our mental abilities, and so forth. But that description we have of ourself is not true. It's what we perceive to be true. And what I mean by that is you might be wrong about how you perceive yourself. You might think you might think that you are seen as friendly by other people. But you could ask 100 people that know you well, and 97 of them say you're not. So you're wrong, aren't you? Your perception of yourself is wrong if 97 out of 100 people that know you well say that's not how you're seen. So we have a perception of how we're seen, and we have a perception of how we see ourselves. Either of those can be wrong. Excuse me. A lot of how we see our current self is based on how we perceive our past self. And how we perceive our past self is based on a continual series of current self states that we have self-perceived. Now, all that fancy stuff to say that one of the best things that you can ever do in your life is self-reflection. And what it simply means is really evaluating how you see yourself today, how you've seen yourself in the past, and challenge particularly the negative views of you have of yourself. Are they true? Or the overly positive views you have of yourself. Are they true? Because it's that kind of self-reflection that allows you to project into the future and determine where you want to go, right? So we can't figure out how we're going to get somewhere unless we know the tools we're working with. And you are the tools that you're working with. So you have your future selves. And again, this goes back to that motivational stuff. There's a feared future self. So if you're setting performance avoidance goals, then you're probably focused on a feared future self, the future you don't want to become a reality, whether that's related to your occupation, your personal life, or whatever. So you end up setting goals to avoid that. Then there's your possible future self, the most amazing things you think you could possibly achieve. And there are multiple of them, and some possible future selves are not necessarily amazing, but there are multiple possible future selves. But there's an ideal future self, the one that you would most like to be in the future. And the key is to figure out what you want that personal self to be, and then begin setting your goals according to that. Where does Tom Carpenter live in 10 years? In what kind of environment? What kind of friends? What kind of relationships? What kind of work is he doing? All of these kinds of things. And then I can go from there and step back and say, hey, that's easy. He's retired in West Virginia. No, you can step back from it and say, hey, that's easy. How do I get there? How do I accomplish that end goal? See, because there's something called image theory. And, image theory, I say, what can you imagine, to help you remember what image theory is about? But it's simply a theory that says we have multiple types of images. We have a values image, a trajectory image, and a strategic image. So the values image is what we see as our core principles, values, and beliefs. The trajectory image is our aspirations, goals, and desired future states. And the strategic image is the plans adopted to achieve the target. What do I see myself doing to reach my trajectory image that is based on my values image? The point of thinking about these images that you have of yourself and your future is for a compatibility test, for example. Is this, when I'm looking at my trajectory image, I can do a compatibility test and say, is this in compliance with my values? Now, if I've already gotten my trajectory image down and I know it's in compliance with my values, then the next step is to look at my strategic image and do a compatibility test. Are my plans going to get me to my trajectory image, which I've already determined would be in line with my values? Now, can your values change? Sure. Our core values are less likely to change, but general and periphery values can change throughout our lives, and so we might decide to change our trajectory. There's nothing that says because I set a 10-year goal to be in a certain place that in 5 years, that's still where I'll want to be 5 years from there. I may want to change it over time, and that's perfectly fine. Now, one of the key things that's going to help you along this journey is self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is how capable you believe you are. And the key to building self-efficacy is to do. Now, this is just a psychological thing. Doing, meaning taking action in relation to the thing where you desire to have self-efficacy. That's why we always talk, every few years, we do another webinar on building a home lab. I'm a big believer in having a lab where you can go in and work with things and practice with things, because you develop self-efficacy through that. Yes, you learn how things work and so forth, but one of the key factors of saying, I'm going to interview for that position, or I'll take that contract, or I'll take on that project, is you believe you can do it. Self-efficacy. If you don't have the self-efficacy, you're not likely to even try. So get in the lab, do things, and develop self-efficacy. We know through the research that the best method for developing self-efficacy in anything is to do that thing. And then when you fail, you do it again. And then when you fail, you do it again. And you start getting better and better and better at it. And it's also developed by evaluating. So just being honest with yourself, if you're turning something down, evaluate whether you feel that you're doing that because it's not the best decision for you, or is it because you're afraid you'll fail? If you're afraid you'll fail, it means you don't have self-efficacy. And by the way, it's possible to have ability and still lack self-efficacy, because there are many factors that can impact that in our lives. Though doing something is the most likely to develop self-efficacy, it's not necessarily always the case depending on your upbringing and your general self-esteem. So you have what you might call self-esteem is what we might call general self-efficacy. In other words, your general belief about your ability to do whatever. And then self-efficacy is usually the term we use in relation to a specific skill set or knowledge domain. So we would say, Tom has good self-esteem, but he has weak self-efficacy in his ability to put on makeup for a woman, right? So I would lack that ability. I don't have self-efficacy in that skill, even though I may have high self-esteem. So you can have low self-efficacy in an area, but high self-esteem in general. Now, if you have low self-esteem in general or low general self-efficacy, you're more likely to have difficulty developing self-efficacy in specific areas. And therefore, that's where you might have the ability, but you just don't believe in yourself. And that's where I would suggest, and I know this probably sounds weird coming from a guy who grew up in West Virginia and, supposed to be a hillbilly who's lived a tough life and all of that. But I would suggest that some counseling or therapy can be really helpful in those kind of situations. Your career action plan. Develop a path and walk the path. It's really that simple. So all this stuff that we've talked about, figure out what you want to be working in as far as the wireless industry or whatever it is in the next few years. And as you figure that out, develop the path that's going to get you there. The education, the experience, and of great importance, the network. The network. And I'll get back to that in a moment. And then walk the path. Self-reflection, industry reflection, and then adjustment as you go. Because see, the most important skill that you're going to have along this journey, it's the skill of learning. I always like to say learning can lead to earning. It doesn't have to lead to earning, but it can lead to earning if it's applied. But obviously, there's so much to learn all the time. I spend probably 70% of my life learning. As far as my career, because I continually have to update my knowledge and expand my knowledge. There are too many important things I need to know to let it go. And so learning is very important, and it's a skill that can be developed. Here's the myth about getting to an expert level of knowledge. Are you ready for the myth? It comes from a very famous book. I believe it was the book that Malcolm Gladwell wrote called Outliers. I believe that was the book this was in. It was one of his books, and I believe it was Outliers. It's the myth of 10,000 hours. The first part of this myth can be a bit depressing, and that is that there is no research that has ever been done that shows that you can be an expert in anything with 10,000 hours of time invested. Zero research that says you can become an expert in absolutely anything whatsoever with 10,000 hours invested. There is research that you can become an expert as a violinist with 10,000 hours invested. On average, some of the experts in that study invested more. Now think about this. If 10,000 is the average or the mean, to get an average with that high of a number, you probably have to have some people with significantly less time invested and some people with significantly more time invested. So not very many people get to be the average. So the first myth is that we haven't studied every area of expertise to say you can definitely develop it in 10,000 hours. There are some that may take much more, and there are some that may take much less, but that's not all to the myth. The good news about the myth is understanding that it's only looking at one factor, the way it was presented in Gladwell's book. It's looking only at 10,000 hours of, and he quickly says deliberate practice without really letting you know what's involved in that, but it's structured, planned practice practicing the right thing the right way, and not just doing something, in that case with a violin, for 10,000 hours. You know, if I take, for example, a guitar, and I want to learn how to play the guitar, and all I do is learn the G chord, and then I sit and strum the chord of G for 10,000 hours. Will I ever become an expert in playing the guitar? No, I'll become very skilled at strumming the chord of G, but that's it. I haven't become an expert at playing the guitar at all, because though I practiced for 10,000 hours, I didn't practice the right thing in the right way and in the right sequence, for that matter. So one of the key things that we know about expertise research is that deliberate practice is key. Second of all, planned learning is key, meaning that you have a structured plan you're going to go through. Third, mentorship and a social community. In fact, when you look at expertise development research, do you know what the most significant thing is to reaching expertise in the shortest time possible? Becoming part of the expert community, whatever that community is. So if it's a wireless community, becoming part of the wireless community. If it's security, you become part of the security community. You get involved. In other words, you attend sessions, you present at sessions, you write blogs, you do these kind of things. Participating in the network, the social network that the experts participate in, is the fastest path to becoming an expert yourself. It's really that simple. And it can be way less than 10,000 hours, by the way. That's an important thing to keep in mind. So with the right learning plan, and I'm not saying this just to pitch our certifications, but they're a really good example of having a learning plan that is well thought out, by the way, by experts in the industry. So as I mentioned earlier, the objectives are all defined by subject matter experts, and then the learning materials and the exam are based on that. And so with that as your study plan, and then participating in the online social communities, in any events that you can attend, webinars that you can participate in, as simple as when you come on a webinar with us, get involved in the chat, even though some of it's just fun and people having a good time with each other. Get involved, because when people see your name, they get to know you, and it makes you part of that community. This helps overcome the myth of 10,000 hours. It gets you there sooner. It's really that simple.